Hello, welcome to another edition of Between Two Nuts. Today I am sitting down with the renowned and mythical man known as Stevie J Reviews. And Stevie J, thank you so much for coming on today and hanging out.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks for having me on. I'm really happy to be a part of it, and yeah, I always enjoy having a conversation with you. So, yeah, it'll be good.
Awesome. Um, Stevie J and I first met on the late nights with Lee and PB, and kind of just hung out. It just kind of worked out really well. And so I was like, I've been trying to get everybody on over time. I'm just really terrible at it. Just trying to schedule everyone, and I know you're on a whole opposite schedule right now where you're at. What time is it there where you're at there in Australia?
Right now it is 20 past 5 in the morning, so it's yeah, it's a little bit early, but that's probably one of the most frustrating things I think is because a lot of people I talk to and interact with in the US, so it's time zone stuff is pretty hard to deal with.
Right. Because I was like, well, how far ahead are you? Because I had the same thing happen with Stig. So I was trying to figure out what his hours were because I didn't want to be that person that's like, oh no. But yeah, due to dysfunctional squirrel issues, I've just been all screwy the last couple of weeks. That's no pun intended. So I'm really grateful. I'm so grateful you would be able to make it on today. I know it's a definitely early morning for you and stuff there, but it is one of those things though where it's a bit of a relief when everything works out. So yes, but go ahead and tell people about your channel.
Yeah, no worries. So it's Stevie J Reviews, and I mostly do movie reviews, but I also comment on news and doing some trailer reactions and stuff like that. I suppose for me, like movies are my main focus because I that's where my passion is. But certain things in the news will come up that I feel like I need to comment on, so I'll do that as well. And also for me, like there's 1,000 movies out there, but I sort of don't want to just churn out movie reviews for every movie that I see or that I've seen. Like there's sometimes I watch a movie and I'm like, yeah, I'm not gonna review that. I just don't feel it. That's not to say that I don't review movies I don't like,
Mhm.
but there's certain ones where I feel like I don't have much to say about it, if that makes sense. Like I could do a 5 minute review, but it doesn't mean anything. Like it doesn't mean anything to me. I don't feel anything. So I prefer to talk about stuff that I'm passionate about, whether it's positively
Right.
or negatively. So I just, I don't know if that helps me with my audience or not, but they, they might just want to know what I think about something. But um, yeah, I suppose I just want to do what I want to do, I guess.
And well, I think it's also important to note that you are a parent, and you know when someone is a parent and they're giving their perspective to it, depending on what is you're actually reviewing, it does help a little bit for those who are out there. Let's say they're trying to find a specific movie or series that might be kid friendly or may not be. You'll slide those types of comments in occasionally. I notice you're like, well, this isn't something for kids, or this actually would be something that someone's kid would enjoy. Those have been smaller comments you have noticed you've made, and I think that's helpful for other people out there who may or may not have children. It doesn't matter. There's always a niece and nephew out there,
Yeah,
you know.
yeah, for sure. Yeah,
And
no, you're right. It does add another perspective, I guess.
it
And
does.
I think I think most of the ones I try to make those comments on are, ones that it could be borderline, like
Mm-hmm.
Dumbo. I think it's, talking about what age maybe
Ooh, yeah.
people's kids could enjoy that, or um, yeah, I try to give that advice a little bit because yeah, parents are always trying to figure out if
Right.
their kid should watch something or not.
Right. And there's plenty of stuff out there where it's like it is borderline. Dumbo is definitely that. I would not. I don't know. I have a bleeding heart. My youngest squirrel, she's very much a bleeding heart, and I don't think she'd make it. I'm being
Yeah, no,
honest.
I agree. Yeah,
It's
well,
rough.
my middle one, he's the one who's he's a bit of a softie, and if no, actually after we watched Dumbo, because we all went to see it together,
Mm.
and after we watched it, he said, "Why why were the people treating Dumbo like that? That was mean."
Oh,
And he
right.
started getting all teary eyed about it. I'm like, "Oh, it's okay, buddy. It's just a movie, you know." But and then I had to go in and explain to him
Yep.
what the movie was trying to say about treating people like that or animals or whatever,
Right.
just the way to behave towards other people. And he started to, now that was probably, I don't know, start of this year, I guess. So he's come around a little bit more. Then he's starting to understand things a bit more. But he's 6 years old, and he's he's
Mm-hmm.
a sensitive soul.
And it's hard when you have little ones that are sensitive souls like that because you're kind of like, they need to understand the world, obviously, and that's not a problem. But it's like when you take them to see a film that's supposed to be for kids, and then there's something out of left field, then you're like, okay, damage control. Like,
Yeah,
my
yeah,
Com Squirrel. This is the first year Com Squirrels introduced the kids to horror movies.
yeah,
Because they're appropriate age now, where it's like yes, they can be introduced to serum types, and I did not co-sign this because I'm telling you that right now. I'm doing this as a disclaimer. I did not co-sign this. Um, but he let my youngest, was my middle squirrel had no interest whatsoever. He and I are
yeah,
fine. We're on the same page. But with
yeah,
the youngest squirrel, she was up for it. She wanted to see her first horror movie, and they chose Slender Man. Um, and it was PG-13, and it wasn't too bad apparently. But yes, I saw that coming. So that meant
yeah,
lights were on in the house. Like wherever she went,
yeah,
you saw
yeah.
the lights turning. and she's looking
Yeah,
around corners. I'm like, oh god. And I mean, she did fine. It took a week, but I told him, I said, yeah, did you talk with her about this? And they've been having
yeah.
conversations more about. Now, I mean, that's a good question. What do you think? I mean, you have little ones, but what do you think is the appropriate age with horror films and types of horror films with kids?
Oh, geez, that's a really good question. That's a really good question. I think it really does depend on the film and
Mm,
the type of film. To give you a little background, I guess for me, I've got two older brothers,
okay.
and so when I was a kid, I was exposed to lots of films I shouldn't have watched
Right.
because because I had my older brothers putting it on and I was just there. So, I think I watched The Exorcist when I was about 8 years old,
Ooh.
and that damaged me a little bit as far as horror movies go. Because I
Yeah.
mean, even now, if I watch that, it's still a scary movie.
It
But
is. Yeah.
you know, I, that was too soon.
Yeah.
It was too soon to see The Exorcist. But there are some movies out there that are okay, I think, to introduce to horror. But
Mhm.
for me, anything under 10, like it's really that couple of extra years of comprehension that kids get.
Mhm.
And one thing I always sort of say to my kids, and it's really interesting to me what they get scared of, and it involves parts of the movie and how it's made.
Yes.
Like there's a certain music that gets used,
Mhm.
or the way that a scene is set up and portrayed.
Mhm.
If it's portrayed a certain way with a certain type of music and feel, then it's scary. Even though
That's true.
looking at it objectively, it's not actually that scary. Whatever's happening,
Right.
it could just be a single individual character, like no monsters, no nothing, anything like that. But the way that it's set up and shot, it looks really scary. And it could just be that it's a mean person,
Yep.
and the way that they do it, it's really, really scary. So um, I find that interesting. And sometimes my kids will be watching a movie that's for kids,
Mhm.
even, and they get scared of something, and I'm like, oh, well, I didn't see that coming.
Right.
Um,
That's true. It's very true. We were just talking about this, Con Squirrel and
mm,
I were, because our middle son, for whatever reason, was scared of Majora's Mask. Um, that
hmm.
it was just the mask. Like he kept
Yep,
having bad dreams about the mask. It was just the mask
yep,
though. So it was like interesting. I mean, did the same when we were children too. I mean, it is about particular scenes or
yeah.
maybe that music. But it's interesting what little ones like. Well, that was kid friendly, and he was having bad dreams about Majora's actual mask. I was like, oh my. What do you do? You're like, okay,
Yeah,
all right, let's talk you down then.
yeah, for sure. Well, the other thing too is I think that you know, those movies that are portrayed in a really realistic way can be much more scary because the kids can relate it to, you know, their own life. You know, the TV gets switched off,
Right.
and it's like, oh, that was really real life. Now it feels like that could happen. Do you know what I mean?
Yep.
Whereas if they're watching something that's really over the top with um, monsters or aliens or something like that,
Yeah.
it can be more easily justified in their mind that it's not real because there's nothing to relate it to, I guess.
No, that's a good point. I mean, it's like they pick up on little things and like I don't remember. Oh my god! So like the first time, this is how I figured out my daughter was like really sensitive. I mean the squirrel is gonna be sensitive. I get it, but she oh my god, like Calm Squirrel came into the living room one day of the tree, and she was sitting on there on her at the time on her little tablet, and she was sitting there sobbing, and he's like, "Oh my god, like what is wrong? You know, like what's going on?" And he was really worried. She was watching a video with kittens in it that was playing "In the Arms of an Angel," and that was what did it for her. And every time that song comes on, she will cry. And I'm like, thanks, Sarah McLaughlin. Thanks. You know? And it's terrible. But it's like little things like that. Kids, you just, it's hard to say. Every kid's different. You know, I know maturity can
Mm,
range, but age is a good, in my opinion, it's a good go to. It's like, okay, where are they at, you know, by the age, let's say 10? And
yeah,
where are they at age 6? And like with my son, my eldest squirrel son here, he when he was younger, I let him. Let's see, how old was he when I let him watch it? He and I watched Saving Private Ryan together, and
yeah,
the reason why was because of my grandmother's service, and she told him quite a bit about the war because she was stationed abroad, and she saw a lot, and so she had shared stories with him. Nothing too horrific, but she was honest, and he wanted to understand the war. And I said, okay. So I sat down with him. We watched Saving Private Ryan because we had, not just my grandmother was stationed. She was stationed Tinian, which was formerly occupied by the Japanese, and then she was. It was a huge. It's a huge mess of islands that are over there that were occupied by the Japanese, taken back, by the Allies, and it was used to transport the atom bombs over before they were dropped. Um, so my grandmother was there and saw a lot of this going on. She was there when it happened. She actually saw them bring the stuff onto base, not knowing what the hell it was,
yeah,
because it was this very big deal and very classified. But so he knew all these stories. So we sat down, watched Saving Private Ryan, and later on he brings up like, "You let me watch that," and I was like, young. I said, "You were asking questions about what war was." And in my,
yeah.
I felt that it was with me sitting with you watching it. Yes, I think that was appropriate because you need to understand the ramifications of war. It's not just the glory of war. That's how you sell people sometimes into doing things that they don't realize. And I said, we've had enough.
Mm.
And I believe that generations, and this is an interesting question too. I don't know. Did you, Brian, the Gravedigger, and I, and then also Stig brought up this topic specifically, but did you grow up with your grandparents in your life when you were young? Or
I
any?
did. I grew up with so my mum's parents passed away really early on. Like I think my granddad on her side passed away when I was about 3, something
Mm,
like that,
mm-hmm.
and um, and my mum's mum had already passed away before I was born. So from that side, no, but my dad's side, absolutely yes. So my grandparents were um, I you know I dare say more like parents to me
Mm-hmm.
than my own parents in a way. I mean,
Right.
I lived with mum, and then I lived with dad, and then I moved a lot when I was a kid, back and forth. But my grandparents were the one sort of steady
Mm-hmm.
influence on me, and yeah, definitely, absolutely, I had lots and lots to do with them.
And I think that's important. I think, like Brian and I had talked about this at length because our grandparents had a major, we were very involved with them. Like,
Yeah,
they were, for me, my grandparents were like, they were my second parents, and
yeah,
because it was just me and my mom. So it was like I could go to them And my grandfather never really treated me. And I had to explain this properly, but he didn't treat me like a little girl. He taught me, I was a tomboy, so I meant I got to go fishing. I went alligator hunting. I got to go,
Yeah.
all the stuff that like boys would technically do. I was doing that
Yeah.
stuff,
Yeah. Yep.
and so I never thought anything about gender at all. Like I just thought, whatever, I'm a girl.
Yep.
It's an unnecessary faux pas in some cases. As you get older, it's the way it is. Um, but he was just kind of like a big impact. I think it's interesting because as we get older, we have our own kids, and
Mm.
I don't know if your grandparents are still with you or not, or if they've passed.
No, they've all passed. Oh, sorry, I've got one.
Mm-hmm.
One left. My nan's just turned what she turned 90, 91. So
Wow.
she's doing pretty well.
Good. Well, I'm happy to hear she's with you still because they're a gift. They really are. And like, once they're gone, it's rough because it's like
Mm.
I had my son young, so he got to know my grandmother, and she was a cartoon, but she was a at the same time she was like the other mom for me, and she was the one that was very much a supporter of like certain decisions I was making um, that were to help myself change and develop. And my mom wasn't a terrible person by any means, but
Yeah.
um, it's good to have a supporter there, at least somebody who says, try. Why don't you try that?
Yeah.
You know?
Absolutely. I think similar to that. Like my granddad on my dad's side, he he was like I don't know. It was like my dad is he's one of those people who's very emotionally closed off, if that's the word. Like
Yeah.
he does feel things, but
Yeah.
he doesn't express anything,
Right.
or really struggles to. Um, and my granddad was very similar, and my granddad actually used to talk to even me when he got a bit older about how he felt like he had failed my dad, as in
Mm.
he wasn't a good dad. But um, and so I feel like he was trying to, in a way, make up for some of that with us as
Isn't that
kids.
interesting? That is an
Yeah,
interesting theme. I agree with. I'm like in my mind. I'm like, hey, yeah, that's exactly what I was told by my.
yeah,
It's
and,
very interesting.
and so my granddad then for me, um, he was one of the biggest influences on me in lots of ways. Like, um, he was a veteran as well, so he
Mm.
was in the Second World War,
Oh.
and he was very patriotic and all about being just a decent human being. And he taught me a lot about respect for other people and respect
Mm-hmm.
for myself. Um, and always doing the right thing
Mm-hmm.
whenever as much as possible.
Right.
um, excuse me,
No
sorry.
problem. It is interesting because that impact that they have. I agree with you because I heard the same thing from my grandmother. She'd say, well, I don't know what I did wrong, but you know, she told me one time we were talking. Yeah, she's like, just learn from my failures, and I was like,
Yeah,
oh shit, like and I kind of just looked at her and I was like, okay, and then and I said, well, I told her, I said, you've always been there for me. Even when we've had arguments or disagreements, we've always kind of come back to each other, you know? And, but we rarely had, you know, arguments and stuff like that. But she would always at least be that voice of reason a little bit. Like if things were not doing well between me and my mother, she didn't talk badly of my mom necessarily, but she would be like, well, yeah, her behavior is unacceptable. And, you did some stuff too, but here at the same time, you have to do what's best by you and your son or yourself, whatever it is. But it was very interesting the dynamic that grandparents have and the impact that they have. And Calm Squirrel's parents and grandparents are also the same, very similar. My grandfather sounds very similar to your grandpa. Emotionally, he wasn't very. He didn't like show affection all the time. He was very old school, I guess,
yeah,
and he
yeah,
was World War II also. And he passed away. God, like I'm trying to. He was 92 when he passed. He passed away in 2002.
yeah,
So there was an age gap in my family. So but he was very old school, and he had went through Alzheimer's. And prior to that, I wasn't really super, he wasn't emotional. But when he got that illness, it I saw another part of him, and he was like having flashbacks and things like that. So I was seeing, because he grew up during the Depression, and his family are from an immigrant family. They were from Hungary, Czech, that whole area.
Yeah, yeah,
And so he was reliving like the Depression, and he would have bad days, and where he was crying and stuff. And I was like, what the hell? And it was because he mentally, he was reliving a memory, and he didn't talk
yeah,
to anybody about it. So it was like I got to see this part of this person that I had never seen before, because he always kept it, tucked away. But have their grandparents, even through that, as hard as it was a gift, because they have an impact on how we live our lives as adults. And, unfortunately, it's like, their kids turned out really funky in some ways. Yeah. I'll say that nicely. Um,
yeah.
eh,
Well, it's interesting what you say about the emotion there. Like, um, my grandpa would not, he was like the typical, because they lived in the country, like, is in a country town. So
mm-hmm.
he lived his whole life with, in a town that had less than 600 people in it.
Oh, wow.
And he was very like, the patriarch, I guess, of the family.
Mm-hmm.
But my nan as well, she was equally as respected as he was. Like, we didn't, as kids, we didn't mess with either of them,
Mm-hmm.
and they really taught us that strict respect and manners, and all of those kinds of things.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and we didn't appreciate it at the time,
Right.
but
Mm-hmm.
as you grow older, you do. And in terms of the emotional stuff, he was just as rock solid as they come. But then I always used to remember, even when I was a kid, so we would go up there and visit in our school holidays.
Mm-hmm.
So that was about 4 times a year, and then in our summer, it was 4 or 5 weeks. We'd go and stay with them the whole time. And I even remember as a kid, every time we'd leave, we'd say goodbyes and all that, hop in the car. And as we were driving off, I would always see him with tears welling up when we were leaving.
Oh,
Every single time, it's just burned into my memory, because, like I said, and especially after he passed away, and it's sort of the stuff I remember is, and I remember thinking at the time that even when I was a kid, that it was odd, like, it just felt
right.
out of play. It felt
Yeah.
out of place. So I was like, why is he getting so upset?
Yeah.
and
Right.
then and then I realized it was because he didn't want us to go. Like, he missed us already, and didn't want us to leave. And so that probably left a really big impact on me, because someone who's so strong and so, stoic, I guess, was getting upset at the fact that we were leaving. So yeah,
Right.
that's something that stuck with me forever.
I think when you see them cry, even once, it's always a little odd. Like, especially like something like our grandpa's. Um, it's like my grandfather. Like, the one thing he was really adamant about, because it was just when I was young, I was, because of the age gap thing, I was like the youngest, grandkid at that time. All the other grandkids were much older, and so they weren't really around very much. And so I had, day in and day out, I saw him for a long time when I was young, especially. And he'd get really, like, if I didn't hug him or give him a kiss goodnight, he'd get all like, he'd be hunting for me. I'm like, oh shit, like, I didn't hug him to goodnight. He'd be like, "Where's my hug?" And I'm like, oh my. But he, like, when he got older, it was like, he started having all those problems. I was the only one in our household that could get him to take a shower, um, because he would forget once again, it's Alzheimer's. So, I mean, we're going back to basics. It's like having a little one, you know.
Yeah,
And so, without being rude, so I never talked to him like he was a child. I kind of figured out the best way to respect him was to basically, like, in order to get him to take a shower, I'd have to say, like, oh, because his nickname was Papa Joe. And I'd say, hey, Papa Joe, you know what? The shower's acting up. I think there's something wrong with the faucet, but the only way you know is if you're in the shower for like 10 or 15 minutes. So he would go
Yeah.
take a shower. He figured it out, I think,
Yeah.
eventually, that I was asking him to take a shower without insulting him, or
Yeah.
babying him in some way. And that was how I would get him to do things he needed to do without being rude, because I was like, there's no way I'm going to be rude to him. Um, but he, over time, obviously it took its toll on him and things like that. But it was those times though of being able to help him in that it felt like I was paying it back,
Yeah.
for when you're
Absolutely.
little, because I remember like one time he was very blue collar, so he knew, like, back then, that generation, they're like, I can build a house and then I could put out a fire and then go help my neighbor do this. Like, it was just like all these skills, immense amount of skills. Did your grandpa have like those types of like random skills that you're like nowadays it's just not common to, like,
Oh, yeah.
building or whatever it is? I mean,
Yeah. Well, he was when he retired from his job, he had an interest in wood turning. So
mm,
he bought himself a lathe, and he would make all kinds of stuff out of, he'd go out in the bush, cut up some timber, bring it back, and then put it on his lathe and start making something out of it. So like
wow,
he made tables and chairs, and he even made pens and
wow,
clocks and plates, all kinds of stuff he made out of timber. So that was kind of his passion for sure. But we learned a lot from him, partly from his bush skills and from his
mm-hmm,
military stuff and all of that. But he taught us. He used to box as well, so he taught us to box, and he taught us to shoot. Like, we went out hunting and stuff like that, and just a whole lot of stuff um, that he taught us that, like, my parents wouldn't have been able to teach me.
right,
Um, I learned a lot from my dad as well, but there was more in one specific area, not a really wide range of things like my
mm-hmm.
grandpa was able to teach us and show us. So
I think that's
yeah, he's a big
interesting
impact.
because it's like they had so many multiple skills of that generation because it was just about that was I guess in a sense you weren't a man, unless you knew how to do all of these, being self-sufficient.
Mm,
And that self-sufficiency was so strong in that generation that, they were just like, they depended on themselves. They're like, no, I'm going to build that. I don't need to
yeah,
go buy that. I can build it. And you're like, okay. Um,
yeah,
my grandpa built stuff like that randomly also. But I remember one time, like, he built me a playhouse, right? But I didn't know it was a playhouse. And I went out there, he's building this playhouse. And because I wanted a tree house. When you're little, you're like, I want a
yeah.
tree
Of
house.
course, yeah.
And I went out there, he's building this house. And I'm like, what is this? He told me it was a dog house. And so, like, and it's a huge dog house. I'm like, that's a big dog. Like, in my mind, I'm like, you're little, you're like, that's a big dog. Are we getting a
Yeah, it's
dog? You know?
it's for Falcor off Neverending Story.
Yeah, it was like, this is gonna be a damn big dog. And so when he finally, and when he made the playhouse, and he didn't outright tell me it was mine. What he did was is he just let my mom and my grandmother tell me. And then I was like, I went and thanked him, and he was just like, he didn't want any, he just wanted to do it. He didn't want me to feel obligated to say thank you. That he was humble,
Yeah,
you
yeah,
know. So he had that man pride, whatever that was. But it was cool. He was a very well-rounded, versatile, self-sufficient man, and it was very different. My I look at, like, my father is very he's a mason, and a little bit of carpentry, and he has some of those skills himself. Um, but once again, it's like there was something that happened when he grew up that he just didn't get other skills. You know what I mean?
yeah,
So it's interesting how our parents acquire certain things. Our grandparents almost, like, in a sense, made up for it without. Sometimes they tell you, and sometimes they don't. But you get the idea that they're actually trying to make up for what they deem to be failures with their own kids through us. It's very strange. It's
yeah.
sad.
It is. It is. I think and um, yeah, some of it is purely generational. I think, and
Mhm.
and the cultural status quo of the time, if that's the right way to put it.
Yeah, that's right.
My granddad, when he was, young, but had kids, he was off working. His work took him away from home a lot, and so he would spend weeks or months away from home, and then, he was that classic thing of, he was tired and all that, but it was very much, I think it was a twofold thing for him. It was not only in that era, the male female roles and that the way they were sort of structured, but also, just the fact that he, um, was living in a country town, very small, isolated country town, which even now is still, probably, 30 years behind the rest of the world.
Right. No, yeah, it's
so,
true.
so um, but yeah, it is interesting. And, I've talked to my dad as well
Mm.
about some of this stuff. And he said that, because my granddad ended up getting cancer, and it was sort of a 6 month decline. So
Mm.
relatively quick compared to some people. But
Yes. Hmm.
he, one of the last conversations my dad had with him was, my granddad saying to my dad, I feel like I didn't do a good job with you, and I'm sorry for the way that I treated you sometimes, because he was he was very harsh against my dad.
Right.
So it was interesting to hear that from, like, my dad's perspective,
Yeah.
and how he's probably, like, my dad was never really that bad towards us, but like he was very strict um
Distant, I
and
guess.
distant, yeah, like, closed off. But then, that being said as well, like, even with my dad, I've noticed things as I've gotten older, and certainly having kids as well.
Hmm.
There's certain little things that he did when we were kids that was his way of trying to show us, that
Affection or.
that he cared, or like affection or whatever. Um, for example, like when I was in, primary school, which is, elementary school,
Hmm.
he would, he made our lunches every day, and he would leave these little notes in our lunches that would be like, just those little things like "You're awesome," "Have a
Aw.
great day," or something like that. And as a kid, you don't sort of think too much about it.
Right. Yeah. Right.
You're just like, "Oh, Dad, you're lame," whatever. But then when you when you grow up a little bit, and start to understand and recognize some of that stuff, it's actually a pretty good little thing that he was doing,
Yeah.
albeit small. It For him, that was his way of showing us that he had some kind of, affection or emotion towards us. And, another thing was that, because my parents split up when I was young, and, um, I went back and forth between parents living in different places and all that kind of stuff. And, when I was living with mum, I'd go and visit dad on, weekends and stuff. And he created this little tradition where he would, and he wasn't a good cook, um, but he would make this, like, chocolate slice, like a
Oh.
brownie kind of thing.
Okay.
Every time I would come and visit on the weekend, he would make that, and we'd sit down on Saturday night and watch the football together. And so at the time, again, like, it was cool, but later on, especially after I had kids, I was like, I can see what he was doing
Yeah.
there. Like, that was his effort. That was his thing to show, like, that he cared and wanted to, um, you know, have, some sort of positive,
Yeah.
uh, routine with us. And, he was really, consistent. That's probably one of the most positive things that he gave us all, was consistency. He never changed. He was never up and down, where my mum was a little bit the opposite to that.
Right.
So
It's
he always gave us
interesting.
that consistency.
It's a little stuff, it's like uh unfortunately with my dad, he's a bit of a train wreck when it comes to that, in general. He has we on that side of the family, there's a lot of many, 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 many generations of alcoholics, and
Yeah.
that comes from the family living on reservation, and so it tragically had a nasty effect on that side of the family, but mostly the men. And it's like the kind where you're doing genealogy and you're like, oh look, another court case from the 1800s, people talking shit in a bar, and I'm like, God, man. And so that's where I went, okay, okay, like it made sense. But my dad struggled a lot. He struggles with addiction, so he prior to him, I would say when he's sober, he's he's still a bit of an ass, but he's a good person, and he at least tries, to do good things, and he did, like
Yeah.
he'd do sweet things, or he thoughtfully think of things on his own and do them. I would much rather be him than a wife or a woman he's with, doing it on his behalf. I would much rather be from him. Um, but and that's what he would do. But once he got back into the vice, it's like he's no longer there.
Yeah.
That person becomes their addiction. So it's a sad thing because my kids won't really know what, because we don't have living involved grandparents. So our kids aren't going to have that. And had many sit down talks with the small squirrels, especially the youngest squirrel, who is the softest heart, and explained that why she wanted to understand, like, you go into those concepts of death, and explaining death to children. And I knew more than quite a few people that they don't talk to their children about death at all. And I'm like,
Mm.
how do you do that? Like,
How can you get around that?
yeah, they just don't talk to their kids. And I'm like, listen, man, kids are very smart. I mean, if we think back to when we were young, um, and this is always an interesting point, is that if we can remember what it was like to be that age, it'll make it a little easier, not perfect by any means, there's no handbook, but at least easier to understand where our kids are coming from as they're getting older, of what they're observing. And kids are so smart, and they pay attention to so many details,
Oh yeah.
and they'll tell you stuff and you're like, shit, how did he know that?
Yeah, exactly. Or they remember something from like a really long time ago,
Right. they're,
and
they're
and
like,
just
I
out of
was
the blue
two.
they come out with it, and you're like, what? How did
Mm-hmm.
you remember that?
Mm-hmm. And you're
Well,
like, what? Oh,
yeah, exactly.
like,
Well, my kids, the little dingoes, were sitting around. Oh, it must have been 2 years ago, I reckon,
mm-hmm.
and they were asking me about, and as you know, like with kids, they ask you about everything, and so they were asking me about the sun, I think, and Earth and all that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So I went through this massive explanation with them about, you think I used an orange and an apple or something, because it was about, it
You
was
had
about,
props.
it was about how like uh, the sun uh, gives us seasons, and how
Mm-hmm.
the Earth rotates and it moves on its axis and all that stuff. Anyway, so I was explaining all that to them, and then they didn't mention it again, and probably like a year later or something, um, one of the kids, we were having breakfast, and I think the youngest one said, "Oh, look, Dad, the sun's coming up," and then the middle one goes, "No, it's not actually the sun coming up. It's just the Earth rotating, and now we can see the sun." I'm like, "You remembered that?"
Kids are sponges, man. It's so
Yeah.
funny. And then also it brings you like that little reassurance of, oh, thank God, something I said stuck with them, you
Yeah,
know.
they actually listen.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. You know, and the other thing too that I think is interesting is when we have these relationships with the kids, and you start to explain how the world works, and they start to ask you like the more deeper questions, like um life and death, and puberty, those things, oh yay. um that's always fun. Like, yeah, but I think that with children, the more honest you are with them, and the better off you are,
Yeah,
uh,
absolutely.
because if you tell a child a lie, they remember that, and
Yep.
and they will bring it up. And like, like I remember, like with my son, I didn't, I'm always like my eldest. I've always been honest with them. So the first time I couldn't tell him everything because there was adult stuff going on, and family, family stuff that wasn't his problem, wasn't my problem, but it still affected him. But it was one of those things I had to kind of wait and see. And I didn't tell him everything right away. And I sat down with him and I finally told him, and he got really hurt because I hadn't I wasn't
Yeah, yeah,
being transparent. And I'm like, listen, man. I said, sometimes I don't know what's going on. So parents are not, I was like, had to kind of let them know parents are not perfect. We're going to we have to wait off on telling you stuff. Sometimes you're not ready to know. Like, certain scenarios or certain things, maybe it'll upset you, and there's no point to upsetting you until we know the end result. My grandmother had, when she was in her early 80s, developed cancer, and it was breast cancer. And she was very easygoing about this process, more than most women would be. She was older, obviously, but um, she lived to be 88, so she was fine. But and she didn't pass away from cancer. But she found out she had breast cancer. She did not want me to tell my son, which was I
mm,
understood. So he couldn't figure out like why she wasn't around for a little bit. I was seeing her, but I wasn't taking him with me because, there's a process after breast cancer. She had to have the breast removed.
yeah,
She
yeah,
just said take them. That was she was so happy about them going. You have no idea. Um,
yeah,
she's like, I don't have to carry these anymore. But she was really excited. You have no idea. She's like, I don't have to wear a shirt. I'm like, yes, you do. You have to wear a shirt. So like, yeah, that's my grandmother. But I was helping her through that process of healing though for a few months, and he didn't get to see her, and and finally, after time had passed, he did see her again. Everything was fine. He noticed that she didn't have breasts, and he was pretty little still at the time, and so I had her sit with, he and I and her all sat together, and she explained to him a little bit, and just explained to him that she didn't want him to see all that mess, the recovery and all of that, and
yeah,
she didn't want to upset him, and she goes, I'm perfectly fine. She goes, your mother would have told you if things were not fine, but I'm fine now. Well, he had his feelings hurt about this for a little while, and he got over it, but he remembered her being gone for that window of time, and he was very young. I think he was like, I think he was like 4 or 5. I think he was 5, and he remembers not being able to see Gigi. He was like, well, where's Gigi? And I had to explain to him, well, she's okay. She's just been very busy. And I said, you'll get to see her soon. I said, but she just, she has a cold. She's not well. It was like one of those things where she's not feeling well. When things are better, we'll go see her together.
yeah,
But I didn't, because he knew that cancer was scary. Just because he
yeah.
had
Of course.
friends, school and
Yeah,
daycare and friends, and I didn't want to terrify this poor kid. I wanted him to understand that not all cancer is nothing but a tumor, right? What makes it dangerous is if it's malignant, or it's been, if it's malignant, that's like an active cancer. But if
yeah,
it's benign, guess what? Everybody's got cancer in that category.
yeah,
you know. So I had to explain to him that, and that helped a lot too, because later on he ended up and this is kind of odd, and then I think maybe sometimes you wonder as a parent, and this opens a question, is that later on what ended up coming to pass is he ended up with a form of retinoblastoma, which is a tumor that grows behind the eye, and he almost lost his eye because of it. And it's a form of cancer. And so when the doctor was talking to him about it, he didn't know how to use the C word,
yeah,
at first, because he was young. He was like, I think at the time he was 8. And so we had to sit down, and when he dropped the word cancer, my son he didn't freak out,
yeah, yeah,
because he knew that people could recover from cancer, and there are serious forms. But after the fact, though, he understood a lot, and it prepped him. So it's like those little lessons of not freaking out someone, especially age appropriateness, right? Was there ever a time with your own small dingoes that you kind of like, just like with the sun, that you prep them with information in a sensitive way, because okay, well, this could come back around full circle, meaning if I don't address this the right way, later on this could come bite me, and in the end it ended up working out because of how you handled that particular situation. Have you ever had that happen with either any of the dingoes?
um, I don't think sort of exactly that, but in I guess in the mode of what you're talking about, one of my well, actually both of my brothers um later in their lives turned into Jehovah's Witnesses,
Oh.
and so
Mhm.
um, but especially my older brother. we get along quite well, and he's got 4 kids as well. So all of those little dingoes like to hang out with each other, and they all get on like a house on fire. But the kids, um, the kids don't understand why we don't give them presents, and they don't give us
Oh.
presents, and this whole Christmas thing, and no birthdays, and they don't celebrate anything. So we've had to have those conversations with them,
Mm.
and
Mhm.
and in that case, I've found that honesty is the best thing. So
Mhm.
we just explain to them that this is the religion. This is essentially what religions are, a set of
Mhm.
beliefs and all of that kind of stuff. They have a different set of beliefs than us, and part of their beliefs is that they don't, do Christmas, birthdays, and that sort of stuff. So we have set them up in that way. But one of the other side things to that is that, the my brother's youngest kid, oldest kid, he's 9, I think,
Mm.
and so he's been talking to my kids about how God does this and God does that, and well, they say Jehovah, but
Mhm.
um, same thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And and so, of course, as you know, after we've caught up with them for a bit, on the drive home, we start getting questions about God and where did everyone come from and all of this kind of stuff,
Mm. Mhm.
which is very interesting. So my wife and I, we're both um, atheists, so we don't really believe in any religion of any kind.
Mhm.
But we certainly respect other people and what they believe. But I think the best answer we could give was to be honest with them. So my son, especially the oldest ones, was started talking about, I believe this and I believe that. And I said, look, I don't mind what you believe. I said, honestly, I don't believe any of that. I don't believe in God and everything like that, because I just want to be honest with him.
Right.
Um, and I said, but you can believe what you want to believe. But I said to him, always ask questions.
Yes.
Don't just listen to what someone says and believe it. Always ask more questions
Mhm.
until you're satisfied in your own mind that you believe something.
Absolutely.
So I don't mind what you believe. I'm going to believe what I believe, which is this, and I explained it to him,
Mhm.
which started a whole lot of other questions. But
Well, no, I think
excuse
it's a
me.
good point though, because with faith especially when you get into the the battles of faith. Oh my God, um, it's a hard subject when they're young. To because I grew up in a very bizarre household with that stuff. Like my grandfather was Roman Catholic, my grandmother was Irish Catholic, and my mom was brought up Catholic generally. And I was, to Christian academy when I was very little, but after that, it was like religion was, it was fine. I mean, I didn't, I went to school for it. I have my degree in it, in religion, but I found that it was, if anything, it pointed out to me the human failures.
Yeah,
Um, it also pointed out historical interests, and because the end goal for me with that degree was to go into chaplaincy in hospice and to be a non-denominational chaplain and to handle everything. Does that make sense? Meaning,
yeah,
if you're an atheist, awesome. You let me know what I can do to help. Like, do you want me to tell people to f off? I'll go do that. You know. Do you got relatives you don't want to deal with? Let me know. That's your job. You're there to support people through that process. But when it
yeah.
comes to religion and faith, it's two different animals, and I had to do that same thing with my small squirrels. They're still asking questions though. You know how it goes, but
Well,
you know,
yeah, and that's interesting. Like, I mean, as adults now, what answers do we really have in
and
in in, con- in
jeez,
concrete? So we still ask ourselves questions. I certainly do,
mhm,
even at this age. And so the fact that the kids keep asking questions, I see it as positive,
mhm,
because the more they ask, the more they find out, the more they give themselves that knowledge to try and make their own assessment on the world and on life and on people that they meet and things like that. But
right,
um, you know, they ask questions about those things now and will continue to,
Absolutely.
and we ourselves don't really. There's no concrete definitive answer, and that's what makes it interesting because we there is no answer, or
No.
at least one answer.
And the thing is like it's so um what do you call it? It's so important for them to be asking those questions uh, because if they don't, then they're just going to go along with whatever they're being told. Oh, this is the way it is. This is the way it is. And that's it. That's not how the world should work. You should absolutely question all things. And, there, when, um, when I was in school, I got into plenty of, let's say, disagreements. Um,
Mm,
and because there's certain things that I know from historical fact that we actually know of may not mesh. The hardest
mm,
course I took, and I'm being completely honest, the hardest course I took was my science course. I had to go to theology school for obvious reasons of where I was going with this.
yeah,
So it was rough because there were certain things I didn't personally agree with, but I understood what position they were coming from. If you're basing it on scripture or you're basing it on whatever the hell you're using. Um, but the hardest course I took was science. And the reason why is because they taught traditional science, like earth science, and then creationism with a separate textbook. And
yeah, right.
I was like, what the hell is this? Like it made, and I got into it with my teacher. I failed the class the first time I took it because I was defending intelligent design. And
Yeah,
I wasn't about to bend on on a stance. And I still didn't. I got through it the second time. I had to have pep talk, but I got through it. But it was rough because I didn't agree and I didn't it didn't click because I really have a difficult time. I believe in formulation. I believe in science to some degree. I think even humans are wrong. There's probably all kinds of shit we still don't know, but that's the beauty of asking questions. And I think children especially, when they're asking all those questions, especially about faith or religion or whatever the hell it is, it's good to let them have that open door. And I've introduced the kids to what religion is because they've asked. And I
yeah,
believe in, I guess in a sense, I do believe in quite a bit of the Christian stuff. And then at the same time, there's a lot of it I don't agree with because it doesn't mesh.
yeah,
So it's kind of like, I'm still in the Bible. There's a portion of it where it says, and God says, basically, talking about faith, right? He was saying, I want you to question things. I don't want your faith to be empty. Okay.
mm,
Why believe in something like a sheep example?
yeah, yeah,
Go question your faith all the time and look into it and ask questions, and then you'll find validation either in that or maybe somewhere else. But in the end, I think we're all kind of like looking at the same stuff. We're just in different brackets looking at it. And for all we know, this could be exceptional legends. We don't know. But
yeah,
to leave that door open and say with the child especially with kids because they're always going to have questions that we won't have the answers to. And my daughters ask me shit about why this happened, why does this happen, and I said, well, this is what I think. I said, but that's thinking. I said, I don't know. I said, but that's what faith is. It's not knowing. It's just having faith that something will change. And it's a complicated thing to explain to a child, but they get it pretty quickly because children are sponges. They're very observant, and they're still trying to figure things out too. So I think it's. I have friends of all different faith and backgrounds, and I'm always interested. I'm like, tell me more. Tell me, you know, and a Muslim friend of mine was sent me some stuff because I was asking about this particular because I'm looking at it the basis of end of life, right?
hmm
So I was like, she sent me some pamphlets about the Quran in connection to science and the links of different things that are within the Quran that are actually connected. They've done all this research, basically connecting the pieces historical to science. And I was like, interesting. And it was an interesting read. It really was. And I've read more about it over time. Reading the Quran in English is just bullshit because you change the translation. So,
yeah, right, yeah.
yeah, I've read it and went, this means nothing to me right now. Um, None of this means shit. And even the translations of the Bible are absolute shit. And there
mm,
it's it getting down to the nitty gritty of the actual scripture was my biggest goal when I was in school. And I've talked to different ministers and priests and stuff and asked for advice of how to study it properly because I want to understand it at least. I don't have to agree with everything back and forth, but I definitely need to understand it. In order to have true faith, you can't force faith. And at the same time, too, you can't force anybody to believe in something that they just don't fucking believe, you know? So, that,
Yeah, absolutely.
just a point being made. But yeah, I think it's always interesting to have children ask questions. But I had one for you. If you were to describe yourself, like you as a person, and this is
Hmm.
outside of all the other stuff we've kind of we talked about kids quite a bit. But if you were to describe yourself in 3 words, what would those words be?
Oh, geez, 3 words. I don't know. I'd probably say, well, I'd like to think anyway, that funny would be one of them.
Mhm.
Um, Caring, I guess.
Mhm.
Caring or kind, same word.
Mhm.
Um, and oh, geez, um, that's a tough one. That's a really
Yeah.
tough question. Um, oh man, it doesn't seem like that hard a question, but it's only
Yeah.
three.
It's
Um,
3 words is like because the first two will come quickly. It's that third one where you're like, well, let me think about this. Yeah.
yeah, I'm gonna say for the third one, I'm gonna say curious. And what I mean by that is not like bi curious. I mean like,
uh,
um, I mean curious in the sense of I'm always keen to find out more information, look for more, learn
right.
something new, that kind of thing. Yeah,
And and that's the thing too. Curiosity is a good thing, and I I mean I'm all about it. Like I think that I'm always learning. There was this thing that was very interesting. That reminds me. This reminds me of you a bit. It's quite a bit actually. Is that there was a story about Robert Kennedy, uh, John Kennedy's brother, um, that he constantly was always reading or listening or keeping his mind occupied. So that means he'd be shaving in the morning and he'd have um, a uh, I guess a recorder or something playing, and it was usually like different lectures from universities or from
yeah,
different people giving speeches. He was always keeping himself occupied with knowledge and learning and
yeah,
curiosity, and I think that's important. I absolutely value curiosity. I think I've learned more just by being, I guess, in a sense, nosy. Um, because I'm like, well, what the hell does that mean? I'll look it up and I'm like,
yeah,
oh, and then I want to know more. And I,
yeah,
and there's, I think curiosity is absolutely the best thing to be. I don't think enough people are curious. I think they kind of just go, whatever.
yeah. I think that's right. Like people tend to have I don't know what to call it, maybe an imaginary screen of where like there's this other information all out there.
Yes.
Um, but they just maybe look to the side. There's that information over there. Oh no, I'm just going to keep going on with whatever I'm doing in my life. Where I try to, and time's always an issue, but I try to actively seek more information or new information or learn about something new. Like before I got into YouTube and everything, I was just a YouTube watcher, and
Mm-hmm.
so I've traveled a fair bit for work and that, so I would spend a lot of time on YouTube, but just looking up documentaries, either historical event that had heard about or was interested in, or something
Mm-hmm.
like that, or where it be listening to different opinions about certain topics,
Mm-hmm.
listening to debates and stuff like that. So you know, I'm just always trying to find out more. So, and if I don't understand something, um, for example, I might not understand how the First World War starts, just as an example. So I would get onto YouTube, I would look up a documentary or three and watch
Mm-hmm.
3 documentaries on World War One, and yeah, just try and get more perspective on whatever the topic was,
Right.
and it could be something small as well. Like I'm a bit of a nerd, I guess.
No,
I like one day I was like, Einstein, he's got this theory of relativity. I need to find out about that. I don't know what that means. I need to find out what the hell that is.
right.
So, so then I spent the next 10 hours watching videos on Einstein's theory of relativity, and I'm like, at the 10th hour, I'm like, hey, snap out of it. What the hell are you doing? You,
Well,
you're not going to become a physicist, but
well, no, it's just it's a way of expanding the brain. It's to keep your brain occupied in a sense of okay, I it's like stacking books, right? So even if it's something
mm,
very I don't know, off the wall, like I went through a phase where I was like I don't remember what it was. I go through so many phases like you do. You know, it's like something pops in and I'm like, what the hell was this about? Like I went through a phase like this is back before like it really was more, way more out there. At least as far as I was researching, I was trying to figure out what happened in Rwanda, like when they had the genocide. I had,
yeah,
I'll be honest with you, I had because I remember watching the news and I was young, and and I saw the flash and it was only like 2 or 3 minutes of footage, and I saw they were showing footage of people being slaughtered in the streets, but it was very far away, so you couldn't really see anything. But it was on
mm,
this. It was on the news. It was very fast. It was maybe 3 minutes of footage, if that at all. I would even say less. And then they moved on to Bill Clinton crap. And I was like, I remembered that. And one day I was talking to a couple friends I knew. One of which was from Africa, and he mentioned the genocide. And I asked him, I'm like, what the hell happened there? And he's like, man. And he told me pieces. He had some family that were in that
mm,
area, but they got out safely, thank God. But because they weren't from the area, they weren't part of that Hutu Tutsi, groups. But he
yeah,
told me a little. He didn't get into it. He said, "But I tell you," he goes, "there's a lot of good books out there that go over this." And so I started looking and I started researching it, and it just blew my mind. I was like, "How did this happen?" And then I looked at the history of Africa,
mm,
and I looked at the area, like how did this get here? Like how did this begin? And even though that yes, it was outside of my country, because Americans, I'll be honest with you, we're jackasses about this, is that we live in a we live in a bubble, and it's stupid. Like I was like so mortified that something like that would happen anywhere, and the whole world just
mm,
turn a blind cheek to it. And
yeah,
it was incredibly. I mean, it's like the Armenian stuff and things that happened there too, but still,
mm,
it was just the devastation of it happening, and I was like, why didn't anyone do anything, to help these people? There were
yeah,
there were helpers, there were people there, but it was not nearly enough to protect all these people, and it was horrific. And so like I looked into that, and it was a dark thing to go into and understand, but I got to hear there was a lot of great documentaries out there. I had to purchase a few of them because they just weren't available online yet,
yeah, yeah,
but it was totally worth it because I understood a lot more a perspective of it, and I understood the devastation of it and the history behind it, and also the cultures and the countries outside of ourselves, because I think in the US in our country we live in quite a bubble. So when it comes to learning about other places and understanding why things happen, you can't just say it. Like that's why we end up in these wars, like nobody understands, right? We're just like, oh, how did we end up
yeah,
in this, and why did the 9/11 happen? Like we can't allow ourselves to be what do you call it, isolated in such a way, even intellectually, from understanding the world outside of ourselves. If we don't understand it, talk to fucking people. It's not a big deal. Talk to people. At least they'll
yeah, exactly,
they'll
yeah,
they'll talk to you. Even if it's in passing to tell you to fuck off. At least they'll talk to you. you know. Um,
yeah,
but I think that's the importance of knowledge seeking, is to understand the world and the dynamics of how the world works, and to not be afraid to keep learning, because
yeah,
I think the meaning of life, truly in the end, above all things, is to understand truth. And the
yeah,
truth is
yeah,
not,
for sure.
the truth is not biased. It isn't a political party, and it exists without our permission. So the truth just kind of happens, and we
Yep.
may never know the truth, but we can get an idea of what has gone into that particular thing, whether that was World War I, which is a fascinating war, um, and one of the
Mm,
most deadliest wars
absolutely.
we've ever had in history. But the markings of World
Yep.
War One made such a massive impact on our cultures everywhere, in our societies. We don't even realize it. And there was this great essay I wrote, or not wrote, excuse me, that'd be funnier. There was this essay I read, and it was written by a historian, and it was such a well written essay. But what he had said, and basically the gist of it was, and this goes back to our grandparents, is that each generation has had the carriers of stories. So our grandparents are the carriers of stories and the carriers of
Mm.
historical, like a group consciousness. They're the
Yeah.
ones that warn us against doing certain things. They're like, that's that old person that's like, don't drive so fast, you'll die. That person. It's
Yeah.
it's same logic. So each time these generations come into our lives, like our grandparents, they're the ones that are teaching us skills and those proper things, for better or for worse, whether it's to learn from their positives or learn from their failures. Their experiences are what helps shape the next generation. So without them, I mean, I don't know what my life would look like. I think it'd be a lot emptier without my grandparents having been there. Um,
No, absolutely.
yeah.
I agree. Like they they pass on so much that you can't really read about as well. You know, they
Mm-hmm.
pass on those experiences because you can read the facts and you can research the facts, but you can't that into feelings all the time. So
Absolutely.
it's it's really important to have those generations of people to be able to physically tell us and talk to us about those
Right.
historical events.
Because it was the reason I ran across that particular essay, which I regret. I thought I saved it. Whatever, it's somewhere. But he basically was talking about World War One and all the veterans that were in World War One that came home. Even though the United States came late to the war, the ones who were there had seen how absolutely devastating that war was, with the chemical warfare that was being introduced, to
Mm,
machine guns being actively used, and all of this technology, and then also the shell shock and the things that
yeah.
came out of that war. I mean, we weren't in the war at all like that long here in the United States with World War One, but the fact that so many people died in that short window should have been a big fucking sign how bad that war was and how
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, unbelievable amounts of tragedy there. But one of the key terms, though, that he was saying was, so those veterans came home from World War One, and they're like, we're not getting involved in another world war. We are not doing that. And so they
Yeah.
warned other generations against getting involved in war because of what, because you have to think that a lot of these were veterans from the Civil War here in the States. So when they went over to this
Yeah.
other war, they were like, fuck this shit. you know? Um, we just lost, during the Civil War, they lost entire families of, the next generation of sons would be wiped out. I mean, that's a whole gist of Saving Private Ryan in that way, but for
Yeah.
this for
Yeah.
context, but you know, it was just so devastating. And so you had Civil War, you had the World War One, and then you had the push to get us into World War Two. That what did it take for us to end up in World War Two was Pearl Harbor, really. So
Yeah.
it's interesting to pay attention to those generations. And so when we stop listening to those generations, and now we have homes full of grandparents. Maybe I know more people that don't have grandparents in their kids' lives. Um, it's so
Yeah.
odd to me. I'm like, I look at my husband and I situation as an example, and I'm like, this is not cool. There has to be that generational impact and the warning. The voices of reason that come in and say, listen, let's not repeat this again, or better yet, learn from our mistakes. Don't do this. You know.
Yeah. For sure.
But it's anyway. But I
Well,
you know.
no, like I agree. I mean, First World War, and it's interesting the flow-on effects because
Mm,
if the First World War was avoided, and look, we're probably not here to go into the details of why it started, but which is dubious. But
mm-hmm.
the when it ended, um, it just shows you the lack of foresight and the lack of maturity, even
Yes.
of the governments of that time to impose such restrictions and such impositions on Germany
Oh my God.
that you then create another world war,
Yes.
essentially. I
Yeah.
mean, it's like you've just won, you fools.
Right.
You've just won, and now you're gonna cripple the entire country. And this is the thing as well. Like, I know that it's all about showboating, and look at us, we're the best, and we won,
Mm-hmm.
and we're going to show you that you can't do that kind of thing. But what they did was forget all about the general population of Germany. They
Yes.
forgot all about the people.
Yes.
And when you look at any war, it's not the people themselves, as in the general public, that are starting, engaging in, and finishing
Instigating
these
it.
wars.
Yep.
It's the political parties and even the soldiers. Really, they're not. I mean, we can talk about World War I being the soldiers were. I want to say normal soldiers, not Nazi soldiers or SS or anything like that, but
No.
they were just general soldiers doing their job. So they were not necessarily bad people either.
Right.
But you look at the Treaty of Versailles, and they're like, "Oh, you know what? We're gonna impose all of these things onto your country, so you won't be able to prosper for you know
Yep.
30 years.
Put him into a
You're
damn.
gonna
They
it's
put him in
gonna
a damn
eh,
depression. You know.
put them into a depression, and then and then of course, like you can just. I know history's great, and in hindsight, you can see things clearly, but honestly, if you couldn't see that coming at the
Right.
time,
Mm-hmm.
that it was going to cause a lot of unrest.
Mm-hmm.
And when you have people that are starving and they can't feed their families, living on the streets, all of that kind of stuff,
Mm-hmm.
and then someone like Hitler comes along who's saying, in the beginning at least, saying, I'm all about our country.
Yep.
I want to give everything back to all of you people, and we're not going to take it anymore. Well, of course, these people are going to listen to him.
Well, yeah, and
So,
he was a former World War I soldier,
yeah,
not an intelligent guy by any means. He was young, relatively young for
yeah,
that position. He was ideal because he was speaking to the people at the time. He knew what to say because of all the shit they. Oh my God, they handed that election to him in the end.
yeah, yeah,
Oh my God.
yeah. It was really straightforward. And I mean, even though he was arrested after the beer hall push and was imprisoned and all of that,
Mm-hmm.
that just gave him really more
A credit. Uh
more
huh.
credibility, because it was like, now after he was in prison, it's like, see, I'm trying to do the right thing for all of you people out there, and I'm not allowed to. I'm put in prison and all of this kind of stuff.
Man.
And so he was given all of that fuel. I mean, if you think about someone like him
Yep.
in an era in a country where you're prospering, things you can buy food, you can live in a house, you can function.
Mm-hmm.
People would just ignore a lot of the crazy things he said, but because he was able to first rile them all up and fuel them all up with the nationalistic, patriotic stuff,
Oh yeah.
and then very, I mean, he was a despicable person, but very cleverly
Yeah.
disguised the other things that he was doing, um, until he got into real power, and then he could reveal his true
He
true nature
was
and his true cause.
he was a master manipulator. He
Mm,
knew how to manipulate those people into. I mean, he just knew how to manipulate the people because he'd been given the ammo to do so because of World War I. So when World War II occurred, it was like a continuation of that shit storm. And and the country was unfairly treated at the end of World War I. They are not the instigators of that war. Um,
no.
and it's unfortunate because you're right. It does go back to how the people were treated, and when you go after a population like that in such a way as if to say all of you are evil, and then once again at the end of World War II it happened again, and unfortunately, yes, it's a mixed bag of just sadness.
Mm,
The people
yeah.
thought they were doing right by their country, but they were being bamboozled in the meantime. And hate is something that's very easily spread when you're looking for a scapegoat too. And it's
Yeah,
like,
absolutely.
damn, and honestly, you could see the formula there. I agree. How the hell they didn't see that is ridiculous. I think they really thought less of Germany. I don't think they
Yeah,
ever expected a Hitler to pop off, but inevitably that was going to happen because of what that World War I set up. You know, it's
yeah,
sad,
definitely,
absolutely sad.
absolutely.
Um,
And I think with that as well, the it's unfortunate, but uh, a lot of the reporting on World War II, or the way that the media portrayed it a lot, certainly
mhm,
when I was a kid in the '90s, was that Germany bad, everybody else good,
mhm,
you know, and they didn't disassociate the Nazis from the German people,
mhm.
and they neglected to ever mention, anything similar to like the Valkyrie story
Yes.
about trying to the German soldiers actually trying to overthrow or kill Hitler. They never talk about the White Rose movement, which was the
Mhm.
university students trying to stop Hitler and putting out, they were putting out pamphlets that were anti Hitler and all that kind of stuff. So that kind of stuff, I don't feel gets mentioned a lot, and it paints German people, or at least the German people of the time,
Mhm.
overall as bad people, but they're really not. And there was a lot of people that were dead against everything that was going on.
And the thing is sad is that to this day, it's still it is still a thing. It is still something that they carry like a burden generation to generation because
Yeah.
it's sad. I mean, because this is we have to understand that generational knowledge of what the Germans people went through. I'm not saying that everyone is excused for what had happened because we all hold an
Mm.
accountability for our country.
Yeah.
Um, it's kind of like when Trump got elected. The way that people were acting was absolutely asinine. Um, it was I've never ever in my life seen such a childish reaction, and it really
Yeah.
is. It is a childish reaction, because here's the deal: if this guy gets into office, and let's say he is, let's just say for shits and giggles, let's say that Trump is Hitler. Okay, let's say
Yeah.
Trump is Hitler, and he decides he's going to round up everybody. Good luck to him. Okay, um,
Yeah.
I know way too many people. Um, Absolutely, without a shadow of a doubt, myself included, that would not allow that to happen by any means necessary.
Mm.
No
Yeah.
way in hell. And I've had to tell people, I'm like, calm down. Like, this isn't, this is a lot of propaganda. This is a lot of political bullshit. And in the end, you have to understand that if you can get people to this emotional level, I can see how Hitler was elected because
Exactly. Yeah.
there's your example. And I'm not saying it's a why Trump got elected. I'm not comparing those two
No.
elections,
No.
but it's the rhetoric of the way people were reacting after the fact. And I was like, whoa,
Yeah.
whoa, whoa, what? Like, I
Yeah.
missed the pamphlets about the camps. You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
I
It's
didn't know
that.
there was. I had no idea. I was like, what's? I swear, Stevie, I have never in my life, ever in my life, have ever seen anything so absolutely insane. Was that reaction? I was like,
Yeah. Yeah. It's crazy. Even from afar, like even from here, I saw it all happening, and I was like, what are you people
mm-hmm.
so upset about? Like, okay, you don't like the guy or whatever, but he's not doing anything. He's
No,
not. He's not walking around with a six-shooter on his hip, just taking people out left, right, and center. Like,
right. This
he's
isn't.
he's
I
he's just a guy. Like,
and it's unbelievable how they were comparing it, but it was just that form of like outcry that I was just it was
mm,
very surreal. I'm like, listen. And I was
mm,
telling I had friends I had known for years who I thought were sane um lose their minds. And I
yeah,
felt terrible because I was like, you've been reading and listening to this crap for months, maybe a year, I don't
yeah,
know. But this guy is not who you think he is. It isn't,
yeah,
believe me, it's an insult to the actual dangers in the world.
yeah,
Because the rhetoric I was seeing and reading and hearing from people I knew in my life was rhetoric that would get someone like him, like a Hitler, elected. It was that
yeah,
same. unbalanced, emotional. It's a form of nationalism, but flip it around, it's more of like a socialism.
Yeah,
Um,
and it's
yeah.
ultimate hypocrisy as well,
Oh
because
yes.
you say, oh, all of this stuff is bad, and he's Hitler, and
Mm-hmm.
all of this stuff, and then these people's immediate level 10 reactions to this stuff and emotion at the extreme and collective thinking as well is, like you said, the exact thing that would have gotten a Hitler elected. It's like, um, you know, Trump is bad, Trump is bad. And then you go out and actually ask people that are protesting this, what exactly, give me like one thing. Give me one thing politically that he's done that's actually bad. And they like, oh, I don't know, he said this. It's like, no, what politically has he done?
Right.
And half of the protesters, and no, I'm not saying that he's all right, um, but and there's probably lots of people out there who could point those things out. But
Mm-hmm.
these people who are protesting collectively in the streets, chanting and raving and
Oh yeah.
being lunatics, they can't actually answer the question. They don't even know.
And
They don't
then
even actually know why they're protesting.
exactly, and and then the ones who, let's say you do get them into a conversation about, well, what policies, they're naming stuff that was never even a thing. They're naming
Yeah.
stuff that was talking points off of an opinion piece, that aren't actually true. It's more an opinion than it is truth. And I'm like, whoa, like, where are you getting that from? And it was all propaganda. And I was like, oh my God. Like, the dangers of propaganda are immense. And it's like not just
Oh yeah.
politically. I mean, you look at World War I or World War II, you look at Vietnam, the
Yep.
Korean War, even. Um, the winners write history. So that's why it's important to
Mm-hmm.
understand both sides of the war and understand all the different, flies in the soup, lack of better words, of who instigated something, like the Turks who love to instigate
Yeah.
shit and then sit back and go, "We didn't do it." Um,
Yeah. Yeah. The
the
Young Turks.
exactly. Oh yeah, that. Oh yeah. And you know what's funny is like my grandparents, my grandfather. Okay, his family came from an area on, well, when it was still like the, oh, Hungary and the Czech Republic areas were a nightmare during World War I. And they got the hell out. His family got the hell out right around the time the war was, well, officially starting. Let's put it that way.
Mm.
So the family was escaping, the areas, because there was so much killing of Jewish people. And they're Catholic, but it didn't matter if you were hiding them. It was very similar. The Turks came in, and it just, the wars were tremendous in their
Yeah.
villages that they lived in, and so they got the hell out. And it took time to get everybody over, but once they did, they were here, and they didn't ever just, the family didn't really discuss that. And then here in the states, they dealt with, different prejudices, so they had to deal with that being an immigrant here in the states. um, it's just, it's perspective. So when you look back at these wars, people don't understand. It took a lot. Wars don't just happen overnight. It takes years sometimes to.
Yeah.
It's all positioning. Like World War I is very
Yep.
interesting, and then you look at two. You're like, well, that's why we have part two of one. you know.
Yeah. It's
So
almost like part one was, it should have been, maybe they put on the Treaty of Versailles, like, to be continued as well at the
exactly,
bottom.
it
It's
was
like
at
a
the
Back to the
bottom.
Future kind of. Yeah.
Exactly, because that's how that turned out. So it's like,
Yeah. Yeah.
when you study World War II, you have to go back to World War I because that's where all this shit started.
Absolutely.
And
Yeah.
so, every war is connected to one another, and I always find that stuff very interesting because you end up opening
Yeah.
up a big piece of every country. Everybody was
Absolutely.
involved, and especially,
But
like
then,
Australia. Man.
yeah, good old Australia. Yeah, we just got nothing. We got big deserts. But the even with World War I, like, even further back, if you look at, Prussia and, um,
mm.
the things that were happening in Germany, like the Kaisers and all that kind of
Mhm.
stuff, it even goes further back to starting World War I as well. So there are all these flow-on effects, and you'd think at some point, you would think, and I would have thought after World War I, they would have thought, what could we do to prevent this from happening again? It's like, on a very, very basic level, it's like one of those tit for tat things, tit for tat arguments almost. You know, like if you're having an argument with someone and you're
Mhm.
like, oh, let's just put it in physical terms. Right? You whack someone, so they whack you back, and then you whack them again. At some point, somebody's got to say, look, I'm just putting my hands up. All right, truce. I'm
Right.
sorry. You're sorry. Let's move on. But on a world stage with so much at stake, they decided, no, we're gonna just get you one more time. We're
Eh,
just we're
Right.
just gonna keep we're just gonna keep poking you. We're gonna keep
Uh,
poking you.
and like, what's funny is like like looking at the stage we have right now, which is a very interesting world stage of just, I would say, absolute fuckery. Um just different things are going on in Syria. Like when Syria first started, I remember that specifically happening. And uh, I was paying attention to the other players, like who has, vested interests in those areas, right? Like who owns land, who owns money, who owns the oil. So that was like my first thing. I was like, okay,
Yeah,
who
yeah,
owns the oil and who has vested interest? Well, you have Russia, you have China, you have Iran.
yeah,
They have invested interest in the oil, and I'm like, gee, this is going to end wrong. And it went downhill, and we were over there well before we announced we were over there on the ground. In the, personal opinion and based on things I
yeah,
had read and seen and saw the actual footage of our soldiers or people who magically had our military equipment and gear like the first year the fighting started. And
yeah,
it all started over something so fucking asinine and left-sided. A kid getting killed over a disagreement and all this bullshit. And I was like, so all this started over that, and then just blown up into the world stage just because of one situation.
yeah,
Okay, sure. But then I was watching as this has gone on, and of course suddenly we have this what do you call it? Red state alert? I don't know. Um, Regarding Russia here in the states, this bullshit propaganda about Russia, and
yeah,
I'm like, nobody's without guilt here. I get that, but this seems mislabeled, and so they were giving Russia shit for having affiliations with Iran. And I was like, you people are, in the way the media was swinging it here in the States, I'm like, you're full of shit. And then let me tell you why they're full of shit, aside from the obvious. Now, these two countries are related to each other. Their history is intertwined with one another. Scythians that were, and this is like 7, 8 BC kind of shit, right? The Scythians were Russian and Ukraine like warriors. And they went into Iran, and they were actually, most of the people that are in Iran, if you were to go genetically down the trees, they're all related to Russians because they invaded that area back, God knows when, back in the 7, 8 BC. Like Vikings were scared of Scythians, okay?
yeah,
And the Scythians were like these ultimate warriors that were like some of the best arrow. They could shoot arrows off the back of a moving, horse at 100 miles per hour, and they would hit every target. And they were very feared,
yeah,
and they invaded a lot of those areas. But Iran and Russia have had deep-seated ancestral ties for as long as time has begun, and those countries are connected not just ancestrally, but also through different policies and things like that. So they've always had some kind of friendly relationship, and that goes back a long, long, long ass time ago. But it's important to understand those ancient ties because it's still embedded in the cultures. I mean, Iran and their mess of a fucking theocracy, what a nightmare, um, has gone back threefold. It wasn't ever meant to be Islamic. So,
yeah. I know a lot of
uh,
those. A lot of that's gone backwards, and it's it's just crazy to think. And one of the, like I think you mentioned there a bit about the media and the propaganda as well. Like it's such a dangerous weapon,
mm-hmm,
particularly when in an age where people's minds are numb to thinking
mm-hmm,
critically,
mm-hmm,
and they're just happy to consume this 24/7 newsreel that just spits out and spews
mm-hmm.
whatever the narrative of the day is, and that people don't understand that there's there's you know all of these different channels they see of news on TV are generally owned by a few big massive
Mm-hmm.
conglomerates, and they can push whatever they want to push. They think, oh yeah, I'm watching the news, it's independent.
Yeah.
No, wrong.
Mm.
It's not independent. It's and there's multiple stories about, people who wanted to report independently or objectively on some of these channels, and they've lost their jobs because they wouldn't just toe the line and talk about what the executives wanted them to talk about, which could be, the
Mhm.
serious stuff. It could be the Trump stuff. It could be whatever it is of the time. Like that make America great again kid. The hat thing.
Yes.
It could
Yeah.
be that. It could be, people just are so ready to believe this stuff. Like, I'll be watching TV here and I see the news and I'm like, man, I don't know if I believe that. Like, why
Mhm.
did they only just give me that one side of that story? I didn't.
Right.
And I also think, looking at it, I'm like, that seemed like it was edited, that interview. Like,
Right.
and then
It's true.
often I find out, afterwards that it was edited, and the person will come out, or funnily enough, with a YouTube video, and say, "This is how they edited my interview, and this is, it doesn't look
Yep.
as good as what I explained more about what I actually said, and they've done sound bites and all that kind of stuff." So,
And it's
yeah,
so
it's
much bias.
ridiculous.
Like the bias is
Yeah,
so incredibly insane. And when you try to point this out to people, they're like, "Listen, this is not the right this is not the right information. This has been, I would say, what do you call it, morphed or mutilated, whatever you want to call it, into whatever
yeah,
opinion or swing that the media wants to take with it." And it's kind of like when you like those old videos, like it's so crazy, um, of I think it was CNN a long time ago, back during the Iraq War, the first one, the Gulf War. I was pretty young, man. I don't remember a lot of it. As far as like, I knew people that went over there,
yeah,
but I obviously wasn't paying attention to the news very much. But there was a commentator that was supposedly in the middle of gunfire in Iraq, and the background was a green screen. He wasn't even there. They were making
yeah,
it up purely for the
yeah,
sake of that moment, and I was like, that was like a big, it was the first real thing I had seen about the media, and this was like many, many, many years ago. And I was like, okay, well, what else am I missing? Because I knew about the lie, for example, about Rwanda. They tried to
yeah,
manipulate
yeah,
that situation big time in the media. And the UN is a waste of time. I don't know what the hell they're around for, honestly. Like, what the hell, UN? Like, what are you guys? Anyway, I don't know. It's like somebody's dad just shows up and like he's supposed to be supervising the kids and he doesn't do shit. That's what the UN is. They don't do shit. But
yeah.
but yeah, like it was just very. I started realizing the bias, and I was like, wait a minute, And so when 9/11 happened, that was a whoo. I was like, what the fuck? Like what? Like how did this
Yeah,
even happen? I couldn't get past it. It was kind of like it was shock, but it was like, listen, who did we piss off? Like,
yeah.
who did we piss off, and how did this happen? And finding more out about that and trying to piece it together, it was much easier to understand. But the rhetoric right after it happened was incredibly thick, and the fear was real. And
Oh, yeah, yeah,
oh my god, like
yeah.
I mean, it was just like I was terrified about it because I was like, what the hell?
Mm,
If this is willing to happen to people in New York City and to people at the Pentagon or just to people on an airline,
yeah.
what else is going on that we're not aware of that they're not telling us? Because how could the FBI miss this? Like, it didn't make any sense. So
Nah.
it still doesn't. Um, but in the end, the questions and the answers, and we ended up in Iraq, and I was like, well, that's not even where Bin Laden was, and you people knew that, you know.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
it was
It's
sad.
all it's all very dodgy, if you ask me. Like,
Absolutely.
I I don't call myself a conspiracy nut or anything like that, but I like to, as I said before, I like to find out information. So
Mm-hmm.
I've watched a lot of videos and documentaries
Mm-hmm.
and all that on 9/11, and probably one I go to the most, like I would refer to the most, is because I like facts, is the engineering report one.
Yes.
Like,
Mm-hmm.
there's lots of people who do have tinfoil hats and stuff like that, but the engineering one is probably one I would refer to,
Is that the
because
architects and engineering?
yeah,
Yes.
that's the one. Yeah, and so I find that all of that very interesting, and I don't like to say this is what I think happened or this is who I think did it.
Right.
Um, but it's certainly, for me, leaves a lot more questions to be answered
Yes.
um, around all of the structural stuff. Because,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, facts are facts, and that's what you can go by. It's just the facts. And some of the stuff that they talk about in there, you can't argue with. So
Yeah.
um, that's kind of where I sit with that. I think it's absolutely tragic what happened.
Oh God. Yeah.
Whatever the cause is, it's an absolute humanitarian
Mhm.
tragedy what happened. But I think around that, the media were irresponsible as they often
Yes.
are, and I just think that, and it's like even more recently with this Joker stuff, and on a very a much smaller scale, but with this
Right.
Joker outrage, they they're so hypocritical because they create the very thing they're against
Correct.
by hyping up this stuff. Do you know what would have been responsible about the media, and just in terms of Joker, what would have been responsible for them to do would have been to come out and say there have been some people say that this could cause violence. However, we don't think that that's the case. We think that everyone should just go and view it as a movie as it is. It's not reality. It's
Right.
just a film, and everyone should just see it that way. If the
Correct.
media was talking that message, if they were saying that message,
Mhm.
there would be absolutely no hysteria whatsoever.
Right.
But they choose not to because that doesn't get clicks, it doesn't get views, it doesn't get
Absolutely right.
all of that stuff, which is what they're about.
And that was, I mean, I'll be honest with you, when I heard about it, I was like, what kind of bullshit is this? Like, it was so left field, in my opinion, it was kind of like they just jumped on it. It was like something
Yeah,
to throw out there in the news feed, and they just blew it up into something that it was not. But by doing so, and there's a lack of responsibility there, I agree. You should not go into that. I think the media, especially, has become more opinion based. You know what I mean? So
absolutely.
like they're
Yep.
like, I feel, dear diary. Like
Yeah.
I'm not watching the news to hear about your diary, motherfucker. I'm watching the
Yeah,
news
yeah.
so I know what's
Well,
going on in the world.
yeah. When was the last time that you heard um, a standard interview done this way, right? And when was the last time you heard something like this where they say, okay, we've got Joe Blow from, let's just say, from making the Joker, and we've got uh, Joe X from the, let's call it the left. Let's just say that for
Okay.
examples,
Right.
for argument's sake, right? Days gone by, many many years ago, this is how an interview used to go. They would say, okay, person X with making the Joker, how did you feel that it was portrayed? Do you think it was over violent? Do you think it's going to cause issues? Do you think it's going to cause mass violence? And of
Right.
course, that person will say, no, we don't think that. That's not why it was created, blah, blah, blah. Go to the next person, and the interviewer says, okay, person, why do you think that it's going to cause all of this stuff? They give their opinion. And then my point is, how often, or when was the last time you heard the interviewer then say, well, you've heard both opinions, you can make up your own mind, but we've had this opinion from this person, this opinion from this person. We don't have an opinion. What do you guys think as an audience?
Right.
When was the last time we heard an interview like
Oh
that? Never
God.
in
Right.
recent times. All we
Dude.
hear is we hear one person agreed with
Mhm.
whoever that media outlet wants to agree with, and the
Mhm.
other person is just absolutely crucified in the
Oh
interview.
yeah. And that's exactly the truth. I remember this is a long time ago. That's how sad this is right now. We're having this conversation. I'm like back in ancient times. Um, they used to have people like that. They would have adjacent. They'd actually have like a friendly debate. You know,
Yep.
even some of the like Sunday morning shows would have that type of talk where they'd have adjacent
Yep.
two people on opposing sides having a discussion, a nice, I would say, well done debate. Um, and even sometimes a little emotional debate, but nothing like crazy, crazy. And you
Yep.
got a good perspective based on, because that's what a debate is supposed to be. And,
Mm.
if it's meant to be a debate, is having well
Yeah.
thought out, facts and figures and having rebuttals and so on and counterpoints. But now you watch the news, and yes, it's an echo chamber. And it's like, that's kind of what's happened on the internet now, too,
Yeah.
within different groups, and that could be
Yeah.
on, one opposing side or to the other. You have echo chambers of people repeating the same shit over and over again. and
Yep.
you don't get anywhere with that, and you're not really enlightening anybody by repeating and regurgitating. Like, some things I absolutely agree with, other stuff I don't. um, but
Yeah, yeah,
at least, the opinion can be made and get it out there and move on, or maybe elaborate when, why don't you agree? Okay, well, here you go. And this is my point. And
yeah, yeah,
you don't have to
yeah,
agree,
exactly.
but
And
it's
the interviewers used to be unbiased and used to be they would have had their own personal opinion, but they never voiced it.
mhm
They were just the mediator. And the other thing that comes along now with these biased interviews and discussions and all of that is that the person who air quotes has the wrong opinion
mhm
is then is also another thing as well. So it's like you don't agree with this or you disagree with this, and that therefore means you are this, whether it be
right. Mhm
racist, sexist, whatever the term is they want to use. It can't just be that someone has a difference of opinion. They have a difference of opinion, and that means they are this, something
right.
else as well to
they
go along with
they
it.
already have them platformed for failure before they even open their mouth, too, in that same way. Like, they've gotten to the point now where they're like, well, we have so and so of this. Like, they might as well just put the guy with a red scarlet letter,
Yeah.
Like, they've already established it from the beginning of that quote discussion or conversation, debate, whatever they're platforming
Yeah.
it as. And it ends up just being horrific. Fox News does that crap, CNN's doing that crap.
Yeah.
And it's a waste of time. And I'm like, I was watching some segment on CNN. I don't remember, and I don't watch CNN at all. I don't use their links. I don't give them the credit because they're idiots. Um, you can usually get the same story somewhere else anyway, and actually get a little bit more for your, a little bang for your buck. But I was watching this
Yeah.
segment somebody sent me, and it was so fucking painful. I don't have any other words other than the F word, because it was so painful. It made no sense. I was like, what is this person talking about? And they were just rattling on about their feelings. And it wasn't news. It was it was all opinion. And I was like, I just wasted
Yeah.
15 minutes, and that's more than enough of my life, thank you. I can't get back because this person was talking about their feelings and there was no facts involved whatsoever. And I think it's almost like CNN's competing with Fox
Yeah.
News. Like how Fox News is that
Yeah.
infotainment bias.
Yeah. Yeah.
CNN's become its own version of it. And it's like, wow, this.
Well, I think they should just change their show names to like Feelings Friday or something like you know.
Like Thirsty Thursday. Oh, why?
Yeah.
You know?
Just take the news part out of it and just call it Feelings, the Feelings show. They
It.
might as well just have another The View, like just make it the make it The View, and
And
every
just
segment is The View.
Anderson Cooper can be the main host, and then he can have like Wolf there, and they can have segments about like how to make a hot pot Thursday, and stupid crap.
Yeah,
It just
absolutely.
it's it's so embarrassing, and it's just it's a waste of so much time. And so, like,
Mm.
I have a close friend who he's a great person, but he's very liberal, and he believes everything he hears from these
Yeah,
idiots.
yeah,
And I will say to him, like, well, did you read the actual story? Well, no, I heard it on the news. And I'm like, okay.
yeah.
So then I'll send him the story, and he'll refuse to read it, even though the
Yeah,
story
see,
is that's like, and
I
that's
don't
from
understand.
right. It's from, like, let's say, the Washington Post or the New York Times, and he'll still not want to
Yeah,
read it. And I'm
yeah,
like, listen, everyone's got their biases. I feel like we have so much biased. It's gotten so much worse now with biases and media, that when you do get that, even if it's from the Washington Post and New York Times, I go in objectively, because you don't know, the
mm,
person who's written it. They've proven bias before, and if you have to seek out the information on your own, so be it. But a lot of people, like you and I, touched on earlier, there's just a laziness. It's not no
yeah,
curiosity. They just want it to be fed to them, and that's dangerous in a world
yeah.
like we have now.
It's just like and it's not, because I know people who are like that as well, and they're quite nice people, good people.
Mm-hmm.
But it is kind of like an intellectual apathy. Like they just, this is all I can focus on right now. This is all I
Mm-hmm.
can think about, and because of that, I'm going to stay in this fast lane that I'm in, and I'm just listen to those snippets of news that come in the side, and I'll believe whatever they say, because that's all I've got time for or mental capacity for at this point. So I'm just gonna take whatever they say, and
Mm-hmm.
that's what it is, and it's that is pretty dangerous. I think
Well, yeah,
yeah, it's a dangerous kind of mindset, but yeah, I don't know. It's a crazy world. It's
it
a crazy
is.
world.
And
Um,
and in the
yeah,
end, it's just that's why I think I think a lot of people it's when we talk on the reason I do this segment on the channel is because I touched on this a little bit earlier with you is I do think that everybody has something to offer to the table. I mean, we can talk pop culture all day long, but in the end, it's it's a small piece of the Coliseum, and the Coliseum keeps us
mm,
pretty busy, meaning entertainment and news, infotainment, info knowledge, whatever the hell they want to call themselves. Um, those things keep the most of the population quite busy and preoccupied, while there's so much more going on, and also intellectually, it's good to think outside of that pop culture box because why are certain films being done now that honestly are a waste of money and time and people aren't liking it? Well, it's because it's a part of social engineering, in a sense, politically speaking.
mm,
Um, you have people who have biases that are doing films, and those things are showing up in those films. I did not
yeah,
sign up for this propaganda, and honestly, there's certain things that uh, I don't care about. Meaning, it's not a big deal to me. But I'm aware that there are certain messages attached to those things that can be detrimental to a society over time. Meaning, you're trying to prop up, example, communism. Um, I have a problem with communism. I don't like it because of what it does to its people.
yeah,
So if you are, let's say,
yeah, yeah,
seeing
exactly.
a group of films that are promoting forms of communism as it being normal, or as an example, I did a whole live stream on this, and I bring it up again because it's an example of why it's important to talk about stuff outside of pop culture, but also understand why things happen with SJW shit, for example, is because the China thing. It hit the news like these past couple weeks because of the NBA. It also hit the news for South Park and things like that. Oh, you said something against our government,
Yeah,
blah, blah, blah. Well, we've had United States as well as many other countries have put investments into China specifically for films because the Chinese government was more than happy. Oh, we have all these people we can sell this to. Plus, our party will buy a good chunk of those tickets also. But in order for you to have your films here, they have to meet our requirements for those films. And when you
yeah,
look at the requirements for I went over this in one of my live streams. I went over the entire document for the contract that's required by their laws for censorship. And if you look at our films here in the United States, I would say a good 80% of our films coming out of here, in other countries as well, they're abiding to the communist rules. And it does blow your mind when you sit back, like as far as cigarette smoking as an example, or if there are women wearing bikinis, or if there are certain words or types of films that are anti-establishment or what could be deemed as anti-establishment, even remotely, are not allowed. So, DreamWorks opened up a studio in China, I think 7 years ago, something like that. And several other major studios were opened in China under the communist government approval, of course. And
yeah,
they've been pushing all of this type of behavior. And I was talking to someone about this, and they didn't understand like why this is important. I said you have to understand where the money is going and how this can affect
mm,
your entertainment and what your children will see. um, you have to be able to explain what communism, the differences of communism and socialism, and how those things also have a lot to do with each in common, but different from each other. But also, how is this going to affect our country as far as our own rights as citizens if we want to do a film? and we can't. A studio, let's say for example, says no, you can't do that film. You have to do it like this because we have to meet the regulation. It's cheaper for us to follow the regulations of this communist country, or they won't. Um, they won't. Number one, we won't be able to release it there, but also two, we're not going to get the funding because they own a portion of our company.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
And
it's all
yeah,
it's ridiculous, isn't it? Like,
yes,
and yeah, people, again, it's that sort of apathy. People don't think it's a big deal, but then, um, some of those people are happy to complain about the entertainment they receive,
mm-hmm,
but then not think about the reasons why they're getting entertainment like that, or that's agendered or pushed in a certain way, and it's because of all of those exact reasons. It's yeah, people just are not thinking as much, especially
I
these
agree.
days. Like, yeah, and I don't know, where, I don't know if I can see, um, sort of like an end in sight or a real change to where it's heading right now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I just that critical thinking that people lack these days, and the thirst for knowledge and the thirst for, I don't want to sound like a dick, but the thirst for truth,
Mm-hmm.
um, it just seems to be diminished now. Where, you know, uh, I guess, and it's probably been a clever or smooth transition by the mainstream, because it used to be quite objective, and I'm talking maybe like 30 years ago,
Mm-hmm.
um, 40 years ago. There was a lot of objective news and reporting,
Yeah.
and then um, it's made this kind of subtle and slow transition into what it's become now, and so people have. It wasn't like a sudden thing, sudden change, I don't think, and so
Mm-mm.
people have kind of just slipped into this sort of um, media coma where they just accept what's going on, and don't question anymore.
Right. And that's like you had said before. That's a dangerous cocktail.
Mm,
And in the end, it's a dumbing down. It feels very dumbed down, and um, like information is can be freely given that's very biased, or let's say politically aligned, or whatever, funded by whoever,
mm,
and
yeah.
people will take that at face value because that's what the talking head on TV said. Not so much they are lacking the intellectual effort to look anything up, and it's onto the individual in the end. And I've said to people, not to degrade people. I'm like, you have to think out of the box, and you can't let any news source tell you how to feel. And that's the most
No.
dangerous thing. And I said, that's how wars start. That's how we got into Iraq. That's how we ended up with all types of rhetoric. That's how we ended up with people crying and like they're 10 or 10. My 10-year-old would probably be more well adjusted of how people reacting. And it was
Yeah.
absolutely ridiculous. And,
Yeah.
it's an unusual thing. But um, at the end of this segment, though, what I wanted to do with you really quickly is there is a very popular inside the actor studio at the end of the show. There's the pivot questionnaire that I've done with two other people who enjoyed this, and I thought, okay, we'll keep doing it. Who cares, man? I'll do this. But it's 10 questions, and it came from a French series, Bouillon de Culture, hosted by Bernard Pivot, and it's just 10 questions that are very random, but it's kind of just to get an insight into you. And that this will
Sure.
be the end segment of this program today. Woo, fancy. So, so the first question is, what is your favorite word?
Hmm. Um, I'm probably going to say mate.
Okay.
I say it. I say it a lot.
Okay. Second question, what is your favorite word? Or excuse me, that's I got that backwards. I get a cookie. What is your least favorite word?
Least favorite word. Um, Probably problematic. That's one of the words I have a problem with.
You have a trigger word. No, I'm kidding.
I have a trigger word.
That person's problematic. Oh, I hate that so much. Yep. Okay. What turns you on creatively, spiritually, or emotionally?
um. That's a really good question. Well, it's. I think for me, emotional experiences are something that always have an impact on me. So whether that be from something like film, music,
Mhm.
or a real life experience. So my kids give me probably the most inspiration
Mhm.
for life in general, um, and my family overall. But I certainly get inspired by film a lot because that's what I'm passionate about,
Mhm.
and music as well. But yeah, I don't know. I guess the thing that drives me the most is my kids for sure.
Mhm. Okay, what turns you off?
Um, Whingers, people who whinge, it
Mm.
really turns me off. I hate
Mhm.
whingers. Like just get on with it and get the job done.
Right. What is your favorite curse word?
Um, Probably. Now I'm gonna say I've got a favorite, and then I've got one I use the most. So um, my favorite is probably cunt because it has such meaning here, and it has two meanings as well. Like
Yes.
it can mean sorry, I don't want to go on, but it can have two meanings. So like if I want to use it in a friendly way, like when I catch up with my good friends, I'll be like, "G'day, cunts, how you going?" You know, and then if
I think
and then
it's a
if I
fantastic word that it's used so commonly. And everyone else in America is like, that's a rude word. I'm like, it's fucking amazing, dude.
yeah, and then when
Uh,
if I'm angry at someone, like if I'm arguing with someone, I'll be like, "Oi, cunt," like
right.
it's a different tone, but yeah, that's probably my favorite. But the one I use the most is definitely fuck.
Yeah. It's like the go-to words that we
Yeah,
cling
it's a
to. The versatility of the word fuck and cunt are actually a magical mix if you think about it, really.
they
Okay.
are,
What
yeah.
sound or noise do you love?
Rain on the roof.
Hmm. It's a favorite one, yeah.
I
Um,
love it.
what sound or noise do you hate?
Um, what do I hate? I hate the sound of like when you get a package in the mail and it
Mm-hmm.
might have those airbags in it,
Oh, yeah.
and those airbags rub together.
Oh,
I
yeah. That
hate that
noise.
sound. Yeah, it's weird, but that's my most hated noise. I reckon.
Everybody's got something, you know? Um,
Yeah.
let's see. What profession other than your own would you like to attempt?
Um, probably probably acting or directing. I think.
Mm-hmm.
I have no skill or talent in that area whatsoever, but um, it's always just something that's interested me. And if I had $1 million or $1 billion tomorrow and could do
Mm-hmm.
anything I wanted, it'd probably be something I'd give a try just for fun.
That's cool. Well, now, what profession would you not like to do?
Um, what would I not like to do? Well, I think working in the sewers would be pretty shit. Pardon the pun. Pardon the pun. But like, I used to work on garbage trucks because I was a mechanic by trade,
Mm-hmm.
and that was bad enough. Like working there with nappies dropping on you and old chops and meat and
Ugh.
maggots.
Ugh.
So that was bad enough. But actually, like wading around in shit, no, that doesn't sound very good.
Mm-hmm. I agree. No way. All right, so this is the last question. If heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say when you arrive at the pearly gates?
I'm sorry.
God's just like, I'm sorry about that.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh, well, that's good. That's pretty good. Um, I want to thank you very much, though, for hanging out today, Stevie. I know that you have the small dingoes, and we all, get sidetracked with these small ones. But I really appreciate you taking the time to hang out with us today. And what people will see on the screen here shortly will be your links to your Twitter and to your YouTube account where they can find you. Also, it'll be in the description box for anybody interested in seeing your reviews and other content that you put up. Um, but is there anything you have coming up that you'd like to plug or anything like that?
No, not really. I suppose, a big thanks to you for having me on. It's been a great conversation. I feel like we probably could have just stayed on all day talking, but we've got other stuff to
Yeah.
do and
I
all of that. But like, I actually do feel like we probably could have talked all day.
Oh yeah.
um, so thanks for having me on. The only video I sort of plug a little bit, I guess, would be my analysis of Joker,
Mm.
which has is one that I'm quite, I don't know, happy with, I suppose, passionate about. So yeah, if you haven't checked it out, anybody, go and check out that one.
Oh yeah, absolutely check that out. I know that Stevie's always putting up new videos and things like that, but the Joker, I think the Joker review is very particular because he does dig into the details of the film. He does do a really good breakdown and also gets past a lot of this crap that the media has spun about this film. It's the movie itself is a masterpiece on its own. And it is very different than a lot of other
Yeah,
films. So I really do check out Stevie's review about it. He did a very good breakdown there regarding it. Um, but anyway, thanks so much for everyone that's been listening. I hope everyone has a good week and check out Stevie's channel when everyone gets a chance. Thanks again, Stevie. Everyone have a good afternoon.